Hey guys, tonight we begin with a house, elegant, candlelit, and quietly homicidal. The Victorian home. Polished furniture, fine wallpapers, and death hidden in every detail. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're retuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Step into a respectable Victorian townhouse, and you'll immediately feel it. That faint aroma of lavender, pride, and something quietly trying to kill you. The air hums with the confidence of an empire that believed science could fix anything except common sense. Everything gleams. The mahogany furniture is polished until you can see your reflection. A nice touch considering it's probably the last clear image your lungs will ever process. Thick velvet curtains block out both sunlight and fresh air, creating the perfect atmosphere for fainting stylishly. Every corner looks like it's been dusted with progress, and it has, usually in the form of arsenic. In the Victorian mind, domestic comfort was a moral duty. A clean home meant a pure soul. A pure soul apparently meant filling your house with experimental chemicals and calling it taste. To live well was to die fashionably, and the middle class was determined to do both. Coal fires coughed out soot like dying dragons. Gas lamps whispered poison into the air, and wallpapers released microscopic death with the enthusiasm of a scented candle. Dinner guests complimented the vibrant atmosphere, unaware they were inhaling the same compound used to kill rats and cheating spouses. The furniture wasn't safe either. Upholstery was stuffed with horsehair, treated with formaldehyde, and weighed down with iron nails, perfect for surviving exactly one generation before collapsing into dust and regret. Rugs were tripping hazards. Floors were waxed to a lethal shine, and staircases were narrow enough to ensure instant widowhood. Cleaning the house didn't help. The new miracle cleaning agents could burn through grime and skin. Housewives scrubbed until their hands glowed red with the satisfaction of industrial poisoning. Nothing said, "I love my family," quite like slowly dissolving your epidermis in the name of hygiene. And yet, Victorians loved it. They called it modern living. To them, these homes were monuments to progress, glowing with gaslight and optimism, and occasionally actual combustion. So, when you picture the Victorian era as gentile and romantic, remember, beneath the lace and manners was a house so full of poison it could kill you before breakfast. But at least you'd die in a room that matched the drapes. If the Victorian home had a favorite color, it was death. Specifically, a cheerful shade of green. Not the natural green of meadows and mint leaves, but Shields green. Brilliant, luminous pigment that owed its charm to one simple ingredient, arsenic. Invented in the late 18th century, it became the most fashionable color in the 19th. Every respectable family wanted their parlor walls to shimmer with it. Children's bedrooms, drawing rooms, even ball gowns glowed with that soft, toxic sheen. It was the color of envy, elegance, and chronic respiratory distress. When burned under candlelight, arsenic green wallpaper didn't just look beautiful, it performed. The heat loosened particles of poison that drifted gently through the air, landing on teacups, furniture, and lungs. Guests would comment, "The room feels so alive," and it was in the microbial sense. Doctors couldn't figure it out. Families kept mysteriously coughing, vomiting, and dying. But the idea that interior decoration could be lethal sounded absurd. After all, beauty was progress, and progress never killed anyone except nearly everyone. By the 1860s, reports started piling up. Factory workers who made the dye were dropping like flies. A London woman nearly expired from green dust poisoning while cleaning her curtains. One chemist tried scraping a sample from his own wallpaper and nearly blacked out before he reached the window. That should have ended it. But fashion doesn't go down without a fight. Magazines kept praising the color's refreshing vitality. Aristocrats kept ordering more, and manufacturers, confronted with the data, responded exactly as you'd expect, by denying everything. One even suggested that customers stop licking the wallpaper. Sound advice, but missing the point. Children's toys, playing cards, artificial flowers, all got the same deadly makeover. If it could be painted, it could be poisoned. The Victorian home wasn't just decorated, it was embalmed while still alive. Still, homeowners insisted the shade was simply divine, which technically it was, since it sent so many people directly to the afterlife. So, yes, the Victorians loved their green. It brightened the parlor, impressed the neighbors, and slowly turned your skin the same color as the wallpaper. Interior design had never been so consistently fatal. If Victorian walls were trying to kill you, your wardrobe was happy to assist. Fashion, after all, was the great equalizer. Everyone could die in style. The 19th century was an age where elegance came first, oxygen second, and medical knowledge somewhere near the back. The arsenic didn't stop at the wallpaper. It followed you out the door. That stunning emerald ball gown shimmering beneath gaslight. It glowed because it was coated with the same pigment used to kill rats. Dressmakers handled it daily, coughing up green dust while clients twirled blissfully in gowns that could double as chemical weapons. It wasn't just women, either. Men's waistcoats, gloves, and hat linings were often dyed the same shade because nothing says refined masculinity like slow systemic poisoning. Those vivid green creates, beloved by gentlemen, were so toxic that newspapers joked you could strangle a man simply by adjusting his tie. And then there was the makeup. Victorian ladies didn't just want to look beautiful, they wanted to look slightly deceased. The ideal complexion was ghostly white, achieved with a thick dusting of lead carbonate and arsenic powder. It gave the skin a luminous pall and, over time, a convincing preview of one's own funeral. Perfumes weren't much safer. Many were blended with chloroform or benzene, which meant you could smell divine right up until your kidneys stopped trying. But the women adored it. The faint dizziness was considered part of the charm. When doctors started warning the public about arsenic-laced fabrics, Victorians were outraged. Surely, they insisted, something so fashionable couldn't possibly be fatal. One journalist described the dresses as killingly beautiful. He wasn't exaggerating. Factory workers collapsed mid-shift. Dancers coughed blood on stage. One woman reportedly glowed faintly in the dark, not metaphorically, but chemically. Still, the elite refused to give up their deadly couture. Better to perish in perfect taste than live looking plain. And so they did, corseted, perfumed, and embalmed in their own wardrobe. In the end, the Victorian era proved one timeless truth. Fashion kills. Sometimes slowly, sometimes spectacularly, but always with impeccable tailoring. Few inventions captured the Victorian imagination like gaslight. It was modern, dazzling, and best of all, slightly explosive. When the first flickering flames illuminated London streets, people stood in awe, not realizing they were witnessing both the birth of progress and the quiet debut of indoor carbon monoxide therapy. Before gaslight, homes relied on candles and oil lamps. which at least had the decency to kill you slowly. But gaslighting, oh, that was efficiency. It burned cleaner, brighter, and released just enough toxins to make every dinner party feel like a séance. The middle class adored it. The working class installed it. And everyone at some point complained of mysterious fatigue, while turning a delicate shade of grey. The technology wasn't entirely reliable. Leaks were common, explosions were frequent, and half the city learned what methane smelled like the hard way. Some London homes lit up so suddenly that the occupants achieved enlightenment in the literal sense. Briefly and violently, still, gaslight was considered romantic. Lovers met beneath its golden haze, never noticing that it was gently corroding their lungs. Poets praised its glow, painters captured its warmth, and doctors quietly observed a city developing collective anemia. Even servants fainting in unventilated kitchens were dismissed as delicate constitutions. Nothing ruins the mood like acknowledging that your home lighting doubles as a slow noose. The upper class, of course, didn't mind. They had bigger houses and better ventilation, which meant their servants simply died first. For those on a budget, economy lamps were marketed as safe, though they occasionally filled the room with a dense vapor known affectionately as death. When electric light arrived decades later, Victorians hesitated. Electricity was terrifying, dangerous, unpredictable, and possibly satanic. They stuck with gas instead, reasoning that it was the devil they knew. So yes, the gaslight was a miracle. One that could illuminate your home, asphyxiate your guests, and detonate your kitchen, all in one convenient invention. It was modernity in its purest Victorian form, bright, beautiful, and fatally optimistic. In a century obsessed with progress, nothing said, "Welcome home," quite like the faint hiss of a gas leak and the slow, invisible promise of unconsciousness. Of all the hazards lurking in the Victorian home, none was more committed to passive-aggressive murder than the wallpaper. It looked harmless, floral, tasteful, maybe a bit too proud of itself, but behind those dainty patterns lurked a compound that could take down a family faster than poor ventilation ever could. The culprit was arsenic, that loyal Victorian companion. The same pigment that made fashion, shimmer, and paint glow was now slathered on walls from London to Leeds. It was considered a sign of refinement, proof that you were cultured, sophisticated, and just slightly luminous. If your parlour didn't look like a meadow in spring, were you even civilized? The problem, of course, was chemistry. In damp British houses, the moisture in the walls reacted with the arsenic pigments, producing a fine dust and a gas called arin, invisible, odorless, and charmingly lethal. Every fire lit, every curtain drawn, every sigh of admiration stirred more poison into the air. Guests would remark on the freshness of the room. They were right. It was freshly killing them. Children were especially vulnerable, crawling on arsenic carpets, napping under arsenic drapes, gnawing on arsenic-painted toys. Doctors called it summer sickness, which is Victorian for "we have no idea what's going on, but let's blame the weather." There were warning signs, of course. Servants cleaning the wallpaper developed skin lesions. Factory workers in dye plants dropped dead. One enterprising chemist scraped a bit of green paper from his wall, boiled it, inhaled the steam, and nearly joined his ancestors. His report was widely ignored because, well, the wallpaper really was rather pretty. Manufacturers denied everything. It's perfectly safe, they insisted, unless eaten in large quantities, which was technically true, but missed the part about breathing it. When critics pushed back, they rebranded arsenic colors as Paris green because if it sounds fancy enough, no one asks questions. So, The papers stayed up, the curtains stayed drawn, and the guests kept complimenting the decor while slowly turning the same shade as the wallpaper. If hell had an interior designer, he would have been Victorian, and his greatest masterpiece would have been the parlor wall. Tasteful, floral, and coughing poison into the air at just the right rate to keep you fashionable until the end. The Victorians were many things: industrious, moralistic, emotionally repressed, but above all, they were clean. Or rather, they were desperately trying to be. Dirt was no longer just unpleasant, it was ungodly. A speck of grime suggested moral decay, and a smudge on the silverware could damn your reputation faster than adultery. So they cleaned endlessly, obsessively, and of course, fatally. When industrial chemists began mass-reducing cleaning products, Victorians embraced them with the enthusiasm of people who'd never read a warning label. Cawler, penol, ammonia. If it stung, burned, or dissolved something, it must be working. Housewives scrubbed until their hands looked like unfinished anatomy sketches. One popular product, carbolic acid, was hailed as a miracle disinfectant. Hospitals used it, so did homemakers. A few drops diluted in water could sterilize surfaces or blind you if you splashed it. It had a pleasant smell, too, if you enjoyed the scent of antiseptic despair. Then there was chlorine bleach, which Victorians used as if trying to personally assassinate bacteria. Mixed with other common cleaners, it produced chlorine gas, the same compound later weaponized in World War I, but that didn't stop anyone. If your kitchen didn't sting the eyes and burn the throat, it simply wasn't clean enough. Mercury soaps and ammonia polishes followed, giving homes the freshly embalmed aroma of progress. Housewives inhaled daily chemical cocktails strong enough to fumigate an opera house. The more it hurt, the better it felt. Pain, after all, meant purity, and Victorians loved nothing more than suffering with moral purpose. Even laundry was dangerous. Bluing agents, starches, and dyes contained copper, lead, and arsenic, turning wash day into a low-grade chemistry experiment. Servants would faint in scalding steam rooms, then wake up to do it again because cleanliness was next to godliness and apparently just beneath the morgue. Ironically, the cleaner the home, the sicker its inhabitants. Chronic coughs, dermatitis, headaches, all chalked up to nerves. No one ever suspected the daily lump of homemade poison. But to the Victorian mind, death by hygiene was an honorable exit. Better to perish in a spotless kitchen than live in filth with your dignity intact. Progress smelled sharp, burned slightly, and came bottled with a cork and a skull on the label. In the Victorian home, smell was everything. Odor wasn't just unpleasant, it was immoral. To smell bad meant you were poor, uncultured, or French. The well-bred home had to smell like virtue, even if that virtue came bottled in something that could strip paint. So, the Victorians perfumed everything: soap, candles, clothing, hair. Even the air itself was forcibly improved. A proper lady could enter a room and leave behind a delicate fog of social superiority. Unfortunately, that fog also contained chloroform, alcohol, ether, and lead acetate. In short, she smelled divine right up until her kidneys gave up. Perfume making was an unregulated art. Chemists mixed whatever smelled nice, or at least interesting, into alcohol and sold it as luxury. Some contained benzene or turpentine, both excellent for cleaning machinery and destroying brain cells. Others included arsenic oils that gave a cooling sensation on the skin, also known as the first step toward necrosis. And it wasn't just the perfume. The Victorians scented their cleaning products, starches, and even their gas lamps. When your home smells faintly like roses and burning coal, that's not refinement, that's a slow cremation. Then came violet powder, a cosmetic favorite made from orris, root, and chalk. When it wasn't made from ground glass, women dusted it on their skin to achieve that ethereal, I'm dying but gracefully glow. Many were, but they looked fantastic doing it. Men weren't safe either. Gentlemen's hair tonics promised virility and shine using ingredients like mercury nitrate and ether. The result, lustrous hair and mild hallucinations, perfect for surviving another dinner party about empire and etiquette. The perfumed handkerchief was another must-have, soaked in floral oils and soon be leaving the body entirely. If the Victorian home was dangerous, Victorian beauty was downright suicidal. The ideal woman looked delicate, ethereal, and vaguely consumptive, like she might faint at any moment or pass away during dessert. The goal was to appear angelic. The method was industrial chemistry. Pale skin was the ultimate status symbol. It proved you weren't one of those tragic people who worked outdoors and developed color. So, women turned to face powders made from lead carbonate and arsenic, which conveniently lightened the skin while slowly destroying it. The results were stunning, at least until the teeth fell out. Manufacturers swore their products were dermatologically safe, which in the 19th century meant no one's died today. Women dusted their faces, necks, and shoulders daily with the enthusiasm of someone trying to become a ghost by sheer willpower. Some even applied vinegar of lead, a delightful mixture that burned the skin smooth. Perfect if you wanted to look embalmed while still alive. And of course, there was rouge. No respectable woman admitted to using it, so everyone secretly did. It was made with mercury sulfide, and if applied too liberally, caused tremors and mood swings. Nothing completes an evening look like a touch of mania and light mercury poisoning. Eye cosmetics were no better. To achieve that fashionable dyed look, women dripped belladonna, literally deadly nightshade, into their eyes to dilate their pupils. The result, gorgeous glassy eyes and blindness. But again, beauty required sacrifice. Perfumed arsenic wafers were even sold as complexion tablets. They promised to purify the skin from within, which they did by killing the user from within. Ads featured radiant women smiling beotypically, possibly because they'd already lost all feeling in their faces. Even men weren't spared. Hair restorers promised to revive thinning locks with ingredients like lead acetate and silver nitrate, ensuring that while your hair darkened, your skull slowly developed neurological ambitions of its own. Victorian beauty, in short, was a competitive sport played against mortality, and mortality usually won. Every mirror reflected a masterpiece of self-inflicted suffering, polished to perfection and slowly disintegrating. Because, in the 19th century, to look healthy, you first had to die trying. If hell had a catering department, it would have looked suspiciously like a Victorian kitchen. This was the heart of the home, a place of warmth, nourishment, and occasional spontaneous combustion. The Victorians loved efficiency, and their kitchens proved it. Every meal was a chemical experiment, every recipe a gamble between dinner and abattoir. The first problem was fuel. Gas stoves were modern wonders, which is Victorian for guaranteed to explode at least once. Coal-fired ovens filled the room with soot, while open flames shared tight quarters with long skirts, wooden utensils, and an impressive lack of fire safety regulations. Housewives called it cooking. Fire brigades called it employment, food. Itself wasn't much safer. Industrial progress had brought new dyes, preservatives, and additives, none of which had passed anything resembling a health inspection. Flour was whitened with alum, pickles dyed with copper sulfate, and sweets brightened with lead chromate. Children adored the colors. Parents adored the silence that followed. Milk was often diluted with chalk and water, giving it that lovely pastel hue and an extended shelf life, for the bacteria at least. Bread, too, was padded with plaster or bone dust to make it heavier. A good loaf might contain more construction material than nutrition. Then there was utensil innovation. Cookware was made of copper, tin, or lead, sometimes all three, just to keep things interesting. Acidic foods leached metals directly into the meal, giving soups a pleasant temps of neurological decay. And since no one could taste the poison over the coal smoke anyway, dinner was served with confidence. Even the tea, that sacred elixir of the British soul, came through. Lead-glazed pots and sometimes contained bonus ingredients like iron filings for colour. Add a splash of milk with chalk, a cube of sugar with bone ash, and you had yourself the full industrial revolution in a cup. Servants, of course, bore the brunt of it. They inhaled smoke, scrubbed cauldrons, and handled enough poison to qualify as informal chemists. When they dropped dead, it was politely written off as kitchen fatigue. In short, the Victorian kitchen was less about nourishment and more about survival. A daily test of who could digest progress the longest. In theory, the arrival of indoor plumbing was one of the great triumphs of Victorian progress. In practice, it was like inviting the temptations directly into your veins and hoping for the best. For centuries, people had fetched their water from rivers, wells, or whatever puddle didn't already have livestock floating in it. The Victorians, determined to civilize the process, simply piped it indoors along with everything living in it. City water supplies were miracles of engineering and biological warfare. London's system drew from the Thames, which also happened to be the city's open sewer. Upstream, someone dumped their waste. Downstream, someone else brewed tea. It was a perfect model of social equality. Everyone got cholera, regardless of class. Then there were the pipes made of lead. They gleamed beautifully and leached steadily. Every sip of water was a microdose of heavy metal therapy. The Victorians found this acceptable since lead had been used since Roman times, and everyone knows the Romans turned out just fine. Water tanks were another adventure. Usually installed in attics, they were rarely cleaned and often shared with insects, birds, or the occasional dead rat. Servants were instructed to skim the surface before serving it. Refreshing in a necromantic sort of way. To disguise the taste, people boiled the water using cold fires that filled the kitchen with soot and added tea leaves, which at least made the poison politely British. Children, ever the optimists, were sometimes given water mixed with molasses to make it pleasant. It wasn't, it was just sticky cholera. When cholera epidemics hit London in the mid-9th century, scientists argued over whether the disease came from bad air or bad morals. The idea that the water itself might be responsible was considered almost rude. After all, how could something so essential, so civilized, betray them? Eventually, Dr. John Snow proved the connection by removing a pump handle and saving a neighborhood. The rest of the city took decades to believe him, because denial pairs beautifully with decentry. So, yes, Victorian water was a marvel, piped, pressurized, and fatal. It quenched thirst, spread disease, and slowly eroded the population, one polite glass at a time. At first glance, the Victorian bedroom looked peaceful, a sanctuary of carved wood, lace curtains, and moral restraint. It was the one room where you could escape the noise of industrial life and die quietly in your sleep. Comfort, after all, was just another word for slightly toxic tranquility. The typical bed was a monument to craftsmanship and respiratory illness. Mattresses were stuffed with horsehair, mildewed feathers, or whatever organic matter hadn't already developed an ecosystem. Bedbugs thrived. Dust mites held conventions, and the scent of damp decay was politely described as homely. For the well-to-do, luxury meant a mattress soaked in formaldehyde to prevent rot and also to preserve the owner in case they didn't wake up. Above it all hung the gas lamp, hissing faintly like a serpent. In the glow of its poisonous halo, couples drifted to sleep while slowly asphyxiating. Poor ventilation ensured a perfect balance, just enough oxygen to dream, not enough to make it to morning, but at least the light was flattering. Everyone looks good under a thin film of carbon monoxide. Then there were the wallpapers, of course. Bedrooms often featured the softest tones of arsenic green, perfect for creating an atmosphere of calm nausea. The curtains matched, the carpets matched, even the family cat matched briefly. Heating didn't help. Coal fires filled the room with soot, and flue were notorious for backdrafts. Some Victorians woke up coughing black dust. Others didn't wake up at all. In winter, people stuffed rags under doors to keep out drafts, effectively trapping themselves in airtight mausoleums of domestic bliss. For the poor, the bedroom doubled as a kitchen, nursery, and morgue. Entire families slept together in one smoky chamber. Infants beside the fire, elders beside the fumes, and everyone taking turns breathing the same recycled air until someone stopped. The Victorians were proud of their bedrooms. They called them places of rest and renewal. They were half right. Rest came swiftly. Renewal was unlikely. So every night the respectable citizen climbed into bed, drew the arsenic curtains, turned on the gaslight, and drifted into that sweetest of Victorian luxuries, a peaceful, fashionable, and perfectly ventilated death. In the Victorian imagination, childhood was sacred, a time of innocence, purity, and naturally toxic ingestion. Parents adored their little angels and proved it by surrounding them with objects that could maim, poison, or explode. Nothing said, "I love you," like a lead-painted rattle. Children's toys were masterpieces of industrial optimism. Tin soldiers gleamed with lead paint. Dolls blushed with mercury rouge. And rocking horses were varnished with arsenic lacquer to give them that healthy, deadly shine. Even teddy bears, those comforting companions of the nursery, were occasionally stuffed with sawdust, horsehair, or whatever the factory floor happened to offer that day. And the dolls, oh the dolls. Their glass eyes were lovely, their faces perfectly pale thanks to a thin coating of lead-based enamel. Little girls cuddled them to sleep while slowly inhaling micro-doses of industrial revolution. Boys weren't spared either. Their toy soldiers, painted in bright military colors, doubled as neurological experiments. Nothing builds character like a side of lead poisoning. Then came fireworks and chemistry sets, because what child doesn't need access to gunpowder before the age of 10? A particularly popular toy was the Victorian chemistry cabinet, which included arsenic, mercury, and potassium nitrate, the holy trinity of early cremation. Many a young gentleman learned science by detonating his bedroom or melting a sibling's eyebrows. For teething infants, there were soothing syrups, harmless-looking bottles that contained morphine or laudanum. They promised quiet nights for mother and child, and indeed they delivered, sometimes permanently. Opioid addiction began in the cradle, but at least everyone slept well. Even books, those paragons of Victorian morality, were dangerous. Cheap printing inks were made with antimony and copper, so bedtime stories came with a bonus lung irritant. Children turned the pages of Little Women while slowly becoming little corpses. Parents didn't mean harm, of course. They simply had faith in progress, and progress had faith in arsenic. Childhood was meant to be tender, brief, and educational. It often was in that order. So next time someone sigh about the good old days of simple Victorian play, remember that toys didn't just entertain children, they outlived them. If you caught something in the Victorian era, a fever, a cough, or a mild existential crisis, the cure was simple. Take whatever's on the shelf and hope for divine intervention. The Victorian medicine cabinet was a museum of controlled substances. None of them controlled, and most of them only technically medicinal. Doctors were creative back then. Every illness had a treatment, and every treatment had side effects that required more treatment. Arsenic was used to stimulate appetite. Mercury was prescribed for constipation. Cocaine was great for toothaches and shyness. It was a time when you could cure anything, provided you didn't mind dying slightly faster. IS looked more like apothecary gambling dens. Shelves lined with glass bottles filled with glowing liquids and names that sounded poetic until you read the ingredients. Laudanum, the reigning favorite, was a soothing mix of alcohol and opium. It treated headaches, insomnia, and children who refused to nap. Mothers swore by it. Some mothers swore because of it. For colds, there was chloroform liniment. For indigestion, antimin. For the vague condition known as nerves, there was morphine, conveniently sold as soothing syrup. Doctors called it heroic medicine. Patients just called it quiet. Self-medication was practically a moral virtue. A good Victorian always kept a supply of patent remedies. Dr. Bateman's petrol drops, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, Carter's little liver pills, most of which were just industrial solvents with branding. But the advertisements were delightful. Happy families, glowing cheeks, and absolutely no mention of kidney failure. Even spiritual leaders got involved. Some preachers swore by arsenic wafers to clear the complexion and elevate the soul. They weren't wrong. It certainly elevated something. It wasn't all ignorance. There was faith, too. Faith that a tonic could cure melancholy, that a syrup could soothe loss, that a pill could make life bearable in an age where everything from your wallpaper to your water was quietly trying to kill you. The Victorian medicine cabinet wasn't a source of healing. It was a polite suicide note written in cursive glass bottles. And yet they took their doses faithfully, not because they trusted medicine, but because they trusted manners. After all, nothing said grace under pressure like overdosing elegantly. Behind every immaculate Victorian household was a small army of servants, invisible, obedient, and quietly dying. The mistress of the house might boast of her spotless floors and polished silver, but it was the servants who achieved that perfection by inhaling it. The average middle-class home employed at least one maid, often several if the family was ambitious. They scrubbed the walls, arsenic, polished the furniture, mercury, and boiled laundry in bleach strong enough to erase fingerprints and lungs. When the mistress said the house looks divine, she wasn't wrong. Half her staff was halfway there. The scullery maid worked in a permanent steam bath of lye carbolic acid and despair. Her hands never stopped burning. The laundry maid stirred cauldrons of chemical soup, sometimes fainting from the fumes, sometimes falling in. The chimney boy spent his youth inhaling soot until his lungs resembled the hearths he cleaned. And the cook, that proud general of the kitchen, faced coal smoke, boiling grease, and exploding. Stoves with the resignation of someone who understood natural selection intimately. Servants slept in cramped attic rooms directly beneath the gas pipes, which occasionally leaked because irony was punctual in the 19th century. They rose before dawn, coughed through their chores, and died before 40. The family would cluck sympathetically and hire another. She had a weak constitution, they'd say, ignoring the fact that her constitution had been dissolved by ammonia. The upstairs family, meanwhile, prided itself on moral superiority. They gave sermons about temperance while their staff inhaled gin vapor from cleaning solvents. They quoted scripture on humility while paying wages that could barely cover a coffin. The Victorians believed service built character. They never specified whose character. Servants were the machinery that made middle-class virtue possible, disposable, replaceable, and perfectly silent. When one fell ill, another took her place, as if the house itself demanded a fresh sacrifice to remain spotless. And yet, despite the misery, many stayed. Where else was there to go? The factories were worse. The streets were final. At least here, beneath the gaslight and the arsenic wallpaper. Death came with 3 meals a day, and the faint comfort of dying in uniform. If hell had manners, it would have been a Victorian home. Every hallway whispered refinement. Every object gleamed with progress, and nearly everything inside could kill you before supper. It wasn't chaos. It was curated catastrophe. The great irony of the 19th century is that it wanted so badly to be clean, civilized, and eternal. And in the process, it managed to invent indoor chemical warfare. Arsenic on the walls, lead in the pipes, mercury in the powder, and morphine in the nursery. Death didn't knock on the door. It was already on the guest list. Yet, no one saw it that way. The Victorians adored their homes. They were proud of them, every poisonous inch. A perfect parlour was proof of moral superiority. And if that parlour occasionally emitted a faint, choking vapour, well, one must suffer for taste. Guests might faint mid-conversation, but fainting was fashionable. There was a grim optimism to it all, that distinctive Victorian faith in progress, even when progress came with lesions. A society that could turn rat poison into wall art and chloroform into perfume truly believed it was unstoppable, and in a way it was. Nothing could stop it except its own plumbing. The modern age they dreamed of arrived eventually, cleaner, safer, brighter. But it came built on a century of corpses who died elegantly at home, surrounded by matching curtains. When the last gaslight was replaced by electricity and arsenic wallpaper quietly disappeared from catalogues, no one issued an apology. They simply redecorated. We like to imagine them naive. But perhaps they weren't. Perhaps the Victorians knew exactly what they were doing, that the same drive to purify, perfect and progress is always just a prettier name for destruction. Maybe they understood that beauty kills, that comfort corrupts, and that no civilization ever dies ugly. And so the great domestic apocalypse went unnoticed. No wars, no riots, just quiet, gentile extinction behind lace curtains. The empire may have ruled the world, but it couldn't conquer its own living room. In the end, the Victorian home wasn't a house. It was a slow-motion obituary with great interior design. In Sparta, hair was never just hair. It was a declaration. The Spartan's long mane wasn't about fashion or personal style. It was a living symbol of pride, freedom, and defiance. When most Greek men trimmed their hair to project discipline, Spartans let theirs grow wild and long, believing that beauty itself was a reflection of strength. A man's hair was his battle flag, flowing behind him as he charged into the enemy lines, glinting in the sunlight like a crimson-tinted halo of courage. From a young age, Spartan boys were taught that grooming was not vanity, it was discipline. The Agoga, their brutal state-run education system, drilled this idea into every recruit. Before battle, warriors brushed and braided their hair, sometimes coating it with olive oil to make it shine. This ritual wasn't just about appearance, it was preparation for death. To a Spartan, dying beautifully was dying with honor. If they were to fall on the battlefield, their hair would frame their face with dignity, and their body would be remembered not as a corpse, but as an image of heroism. The act of grooming before combat shocked outsiders. To the Athenians and other Greeks, it seemed strange, even arrogant, but for Spartans, it was sacred. Plutarch once wrote that they paid the most attention to their hair when they were about to enter danger because they wished to appear noble in the face of death. This wasn't arrogance, it was a performance of courage. When you looked good facing death, fear lost its power. Even the defeated enemy would remember the sight. A wall of long-haired men shining in bronze armor, each ready to meet his end unflinching. Their hair became their legend. Mothers and wives in Sparta would brush and braid the hair of their sons and husbands before they left for war, sometimes whispering, "Return with your shield," or on it. Long hair was never permitted for slaves or cowards. It was reserved for the free, for those who had proven themselves worthy in battle. In a world built on endurance, silence, and blood, a Spartan's hair was his final statement. A reminder that beauty and death were not opposites, but allies. The Spartan approach to grooming was forged in the fires of the agoge, the infamous training system that shaped boys into living weapons. From the age of 7, every male child was taken from his mother's arms and handed over to the state to be stripped of comfort, taught to endure pain, and molded into a warrior. Yet amid all the brutality, the starvation, the whippings, the endless drills, one lesson stood out. Discipline extended even to appearance. While other Greek city-states saw grooming as feminine or indulgent, the Spartans viewed it as a matter of order. A soldier who could keep his body clean and his hair neat after a day of mud, sweat, and combat was one who had mastered himself. It was said that the state's instructors would inspect not only the boys' posture and weapons, but their nails, their cloaks, and their hair. Dirt and disorder were signs of weakness, and in Sparta, weakness was a disease. The agoge taught that a warrior's worth was measured not only by his sword, but by his composure. A man who looked disheveled before his peers was thought to lack inner strength. After all, the enemy should never see you broken, not even in the smallest detail. A true Spartan could suffer hunger, loss, or pain, and still appear immaculate. The discipline of grooming was the outward reflection of inward control. Each morning, the boys would wash in cold water, comb their hair, and polish their weapons, a trifecta of order. Their mentors used these small rituals to build rhythm and resilience. They were told, if you cannot master your hair, you cannot master yourself. The message was clear. Discipline in small things prepares you for greatness in the large. By the time these boys became men, the routine was second nature. Before war, they'd bathe, oil their skin, and comb their long hair, even when death waited on the horizon. To them, there was no contradiction between savagery and elegance. Cleanliness, posture, and poise were weapons of their own. And so the agoge's lessons lingered. Their beauty was not luxury, but armor, a visible testament to Spartan order, even amid the chaos of war. Before every great battle, when the air grew heavy with the scent of bronze and fear, the Spartans performed a ritual that baffled their enemies. As the rest of Greece sharpened swords and tightened armor straps, the warriors of Laconia reached for their combs. They sat calmly by the campfires, oiling and braiding their long hair, each movement deliberate, unhurried, almost sacred. This was not vanity, it was ritual defiance, to prepare one's hair before stepping into the jaws of death was the ultimate expression of Spartan courage. It told the world, we do not rush toward fate. we meet it on our own terms. When Persian scouts spied on Leonidas' 300 men at Thermopylae, they were reportedly astonished to find them combing their hair and polishing their shields instead of bracing for slaughter. To the Persians, it looked like madness. To the Spartans, it was dignity. The rituals served a dual purpose, psychological and spiritual. The act of grooming calmed the nerves and focused the mind. In the same way that a priest prepares for a sacred rite, the Spartan prepared for battle. Not through panic or frenzy, but through ritual order. Combing the hair, oiling the skin, and tightening the cloak were acts of grounding. Reminders of humanity before the chaos of war stripped it away. There was also a deep sense of solidarity. Warriors would groom one another, inspecting braids, helping to tie back locks, making sure every man looked fierce and honorable. This shared ritual turned an army into a brotherhood. When the time came to face death, they would not march as individuals, but as a single disciplined body, each man as composed as the next. To die unkempt was shameful. To die with your hair neatly arranged was to die as a Spartan, clean, composed, and unforgettable. Even after the battle, when their lifeless bodies were retrieved, the sight of orderly hair and polished armor was a haunting reminder. These men were prepared not just to fight, but to be remembered. In Sparta, the preparation for death was never grim. It was graceful. The brush, the oil, the braid, these were not tools of vanity, but instruments of immortality. Spartan women were as proud of their hair as their men, and perhaps even more symbolic in their grooming. In a society where women trained, owned land, and commanded respect unlike anywhere else in Greece, their appearance was not a matter of seduction, but a declaration of power. The long hair of a Spartan woman was a crown, a mark of vitality, discipline, and noble bloodline. While Athenian women covered their hair modestly, Spartan women wore theirs loose, free, and visible. To outsiders, it seemed scandalous, too bold, too confident, but to the Spartans, it reflected the same freedom and dignity their men embodied in battle. They believed that beauty and strength were inseparable virtues. A well-kept appearance meant inner balance, just as a strong body reflected a disciplined spirit. When a woman married, tradition required her to cut her hair short, a symbolic act representing the transition from maiden to wife. Her hair would grow long again as she settled into her role, reflecting her status as a matron, the backbone of Spartan society. It was a ritual that mirrored the cycles of battle and peace, cutting away innocence, regrowing wisdom. Women played an intimate role in the grooming of warriors, too. Before their husbands or sons went to war, they combed and braided their hair, whispering blessings of courage. This act was deeply emotional, part affection, part preparation for death. Every strand they straightened might be the last they'd ever touch. Yet Spartan women did not cry. They took pride in the ritual. To weep before battle was weakness. To send a well-groomed son to war was honor. Their famous saying, "Return with your shield or on it," carried the same spirit. Beauty, discipline, and death were intertwined threads in the Spartan worldview. For women, maintaining their own hair was an act of resistance against despair. For men, allowing their hair to be tended was an acknowledgement of love and duty. In a land where both genders lived for the state, grooming was not a luxury. It was a patriotic duty. The luster of their hair reflected the health of Sparta itself. And in every braid, every polished strand lived the echo of that relentless ideal to be beautiful, even in the shadow of death. In Sparta, hair carried meanings that ran far deeper than aesthetics. It was a living code, a visual language of identity, freedom, and courage. The long hair of a Spartan warrior proclaimed him a free man, one who had completed the brutal education of the ego and earned the right to call himself a citizen soldier. Only the enslaved and the cowardly wore their hair short. To cut it without cause was to renounce one's honor. Freedom, in the Spartan sense, was never about doing as one pleased. It was about the right to embody dignity. The flowing hair of a Spartan was not wild rebellion. It was disciplined defiance. It symbolized mastery over the self and therefore mastery over fear. A warrior's hair shining in the sun reminded both friend and foe that the man beneath it feared neither blade nor death. It was said that when Spartan armies marched, their hair moved like a sea of dark fire, a spectacle so imposing that it broke the enemy's courage before the first spear was thrown. Hair also marked transitions in life. Boys shaved their heads when they entered the OG, a symbolic shedding of childhood. When they graduated into manhood, they let it grow long again, the return of freedom through earned discipline. Every inch of that hair told a story of endurance, of scars, of loyalty to Sparta. But the symbolism went beyond life itself. After a warrior fell in battle, his comrades would comb his hair one final time before burning or burying him. It was an act of reverence, ensuring that he entered the afterlife not as a mangled corpse, but as a hero whose appearance reflected his spirit. His hair, still immaculate, testified that he had met death with grace. Even prisoners of war, when stripped of their hair by captives, understood the humiliation. To be stripped of one's locks was to be stripped of one's identity as a Spartan. Long hair was the last luxury of freedom, the banner of the living. And when it fluttered over the blood-soaked fields of Thermopylae or Plataea, it was more than ornament. It was a symbol of what no conqueror could ever take. The Spartan soul, unbroken, unbowed, and unforgettable. Though Spartan life was defined by austerity, grooming held a special, almost ceremonial place within the city-state's daily rhythm. Unlike Athens or Corinth, Sparta had no bustling marketplaces filled with perfumed barbers boasting exotic oils. Yet even here, barbers existed, and they were treated with a peculiar kind of respect. Their task was not mere trimming or styling, but the maintenance of discipline itself. The Spartan barber's chair was less a luxury and more a seat of honor. Men of the same regiment would visit together, not for idle chatter, but to maintain the unity of their appearance. The barber's tools were simple: combs, blades, and jars of olive oil. But the atmosphere was solemn. To have one's hair tended was not a moment of leisure. It was an affirmation that even in peace, a warrior's body must remain ready. Young recruits freshly graduated from the OG would often have their first full grooming done publicly. It was a mark of transition, a visual confirmation that they had endured every trial and were now among the ranks of men. Elders might watch in silence, approving the neatness of the cut, the symmetry of the braid. Beauty was never left to chance in Sparta. It was engineered through ritual precision. Women too engaged in collective grooming. On certain festivals, Spartan maidens would braid one another's hair in long flowing patterns, sometimes weaving in small ribbons of crimson or bronze to symbolize vitality and lineage. These gatherings were not idle vanity. They were performances of unity, reflections of Sparta's ideal that harmony between individuals strengthened the state as a whole. What separated Spartan grooming from that of other Greek cities was its public nature. No one hid behind curtains or private courtyards. Grooming was communal, visible, and deliberate, a social act that reinforced hierarchy and order. Even kings took part, sitting beside common soldiers before great campaigns, allowing barbers or comrades to comb their hair before addressing the troops. It was through these shared rituals that the city maintained its cohesion. Every stroke of the comb, every twist of the braid, every glint of olive oil was a small reminder of a greater truth, that in Sparta, beauty was discipline made visible, and grooming was a civic duty as sacred as warfare itself. In a culture where fear was considered treason, appearance became psychology. The Spartans understood that morale, both their own and their enemies, could be shaped not only by words and weapons, but by the way they presented themselves. Hair, gleaming and untamed, was the first line of psychological warfare. Before battle, when the enemy still waited beyond the field, Spartans took their time. They combed their hair, oiled their bodies, and straightened their crimson cloaks. The purpose was clear: serenity in the face of death. To any observer, this calmness looked supernatural, almost divine. The Persians at Thermopylae thought Leonidas men mad, but the Spartans wanted them to think that a warrior who can calmly fix his hair before dying is one who has already conquered fear. That display alone could weaken the enemy's will. Historians later wrote that even the most disciplined foes hesitated before charging men who looked so ready to die beautifully. It was psychological intimidation disguised as elegance. Clean hair became a weapon, a visible sign of confidence that infected the battlefield. But the ritual did more than frighten others. It fortified the Spartans themselves. The combing, the oiling, the tightening of the braid became an act of meditation. Each motion reminded them of their upbringing, their oaths, their ancestors. It grounded them. The warrior who focused on his grooming was in truth preparing his spirit. To go into battle disheveled would be to go in unprepared, both in body and in mind. Even after battle, survivors continued the ritual of grooming. They washed their hair in cold water, cleaned the dust and blood from their scalps, and combed through the tangles of war. It was an act of recovery, both physical and spiritual. To cleanse oneself was to honor the fallen and to remind the living that discipline must endure even after chaos. In this way, the Spartan ideal of grooming became a mirror of their inner philosophy, that true strength lies not in rage but in composure, not in frenzy but in control. Every polished strand of hair reflected that core belief that a warrior's beauty was not vanity, but victory over fear itself. For Spartans, grooming did not end with life. It extended into death, the last ritual before eternity. When a warrior fell on the battlefield, his comrades treated his body not as a casualty, but as a relic of honor. The first act was always the same: to straighten his cloak, polish his armor, and comb his hair one final time. This final grooming was more than a gesture of respect. It was a sacred duty. A disheveled corpse was seen as an insult to the gods and to Sparta itself. The fallen deserved to be remembered not in disarray but in beauty, the kind of beauty that testified to courage, control, and readiness for death. Even after blood and dust had claimed their faces, the Spartans made sure that the last thing the world saw was dignity. The mothers who had sent these men to war understood this intimately. When word of death returned to Sparta, they did not wail or tear their hair as other Greek women did. Instead, they combed and braided their own, a silent act of acceptance. The ritual was cyclical. The same hands that had prepared a son for battle now prepared themselves for mourning. Yet even mourning was neat, measured, and disciplined. It was said that before a great burial, the women of the city would gather to oil the hair of the deceased, their movements synchronized, rhythmic, almost like a prayer. The act was intimate but impersonal, for, in Sparta, death belonged not to families but to the state. Every braid tied was a promise that the fallen would be remembered in order, not chaos. The graves of warriors were simple, marked only with their names and the phrase for Sparta. But their memory lived vividly through the image left behind. Hair braided, faces serene, armor gleaming in the afterglow of sacrifice. The ritual ensured that even in death, the Spartan remained whole. In a world obsessed with survival, Spartans taught that how one looked in death mattered as much as how one lived. The final combing was a farewell not of sorrow, but of reverence, the last act of defiance against decay, and a reminder that beauty, like valor, could transcend the grave. Centuries have passed since Sparta's walls crumbled, and its phalanxes faded into legend. Yet the image of the long-haired Spartan endures, timeless, unyielding, immortal. Ancient writers, artists, and philosophers never forgot that peculiar blend of savagery and grace. The hair, so meticulously cared for before battle, became the symbol of everything the Spartans represented: courage, control, and the refusal to be conquered by fear or disorder. When later Greek cities looked back on Sparta, they saw more than soldiers. They saw an ideal. Even Rome, a civilization built on discipline and conquest, borrowed fragments of Spartan identity. Roman soldiers oiled their hair, groomed before inspection, and admired the laconic virtue of neatness in chaos. The Spartans had taught the world that appearance is the mirror of the soul, that order in the body reveals order in the mind. The ritual survived in subtle ways. Throughout history, armies continued the habit of cleaning, shaving, or arranging themselves before combat. Napoleon's troops polished their boots before cannon fire. Japanese samurai brushed their hair before committing. Seppuku, modern soldiers still check their uniforms before stepping into the unknown. Each act carries the same unspoken philosophy: dignity and discipline, beauty and bravery. For historians, the Spartan obsession with grooming offers a glimpse into their psychology. They were not vain men, they were deliberate ones. In a society where the line between life and death was thin, they found meaning in control. To master one's hair was to master chaos itself. That's why their long locks became such a potent emblem, a visible reminder that the human spirit, when trained, could remain composed even while facing annihilation. Today, the Spartan look lives on in art, film, and imagination. The calm warrior, hair flowing behind a polished helmet, eyes fixed forward. It is a myth reborn endlessly from ancient marble to Hollywood screens. Yet beneath the armor and legend lies something simpler and more profound: the belief that discipline can make even death beautiful. The legacy of Spartan grooming endures not because of vanity, but because it speaks to something eternal. In every age, those who face their battles, literal or metaphorical, understand what the Spartans once knew: that order, pride, and composure are the final luxuries of the truly free. Before the philosophers gathered to argue about virtue and geometry, before the sculptors picked up their chisels, Athens awoke to the smell of food. As the first rays of sunlight struck the marble columns of the agora, the hum of trade began, not with politics, but with breakfast. Vendors, fishermen, bakers, and farmers converged on the city's beating heart, transforming it into a festival of smoke, chatter, and aroma. Carts rattled across the stones as merchants set up makeshift stalls. Clay braziers hissed to life, fueled by olive wood and charcoal. The air filled with the scent of sesame, honey, and grilled fish, a perfume so familiar that even the stray dogs lingered as if hypnotized. The agora, part marketplace, part theater, was where Athenians tasted life itself. Food was the great equalizer. The philosopher and the potter might argue endlessly about the meaning of the good life, but both began their mornings the same way, with a bite of something cheap, warm, and quick. Street food in ancient Greece was the forerunner of modern fast food, affordable, fast, and packed with flavor. Vendors shouted over each other, each trying to draw a crowd with practiced voices. Honey cakes, roasted chickpeas, fresh olives from the Pelpanias. Most of these delicacies were simple but divine. You could buy barley cakes, drizzled with honey, still warm from the coals. Chickpeas were roasted until crisp and salted by hand. Olive sellers carried baskets lined with leaves to keep their wares cool, while a few daring cooks grilled tiny fish on skewers, their skins sizzling in oil. For a few bowls, small copper coins, you could fill your stomach and walk away full enough to face the day's work or debate. Around the food stalls, the agora came alive. Merchants haggled. Children darted between tables, clutching sesame pastries. Stray cats prowled for scraps. The clatter of pottery and the hiss of oil competed with laughter and gossip. It was here that daily life truly began. Long before fast food became a term, Athens had perfected it. Food meant not for feasts or banquets, but for the streets, eaten with one hand, enjoyed among strangers, and flavored with the dust of the city that never stopped talking. If Athens had a smell, it was the smell of bread and olives. They were the city's most democratic foods, eaten by philosophers, slaves, soldiers, and statesmen alike. For many, this humble pairing wasn't just a snack, it was survival. A loaf of barley bread, coarse and dense, paired with a handful of salted olives, could sustain a worker through an entire day of labor beneath the Mediterranean sun. Bread was the backbone of Greek street food. Bakers rose before dawn, kneading dough made from barley, wheat, or spelt, depending on one's means. Barley was the grain of the poor, wheat the luxury of the rich. The smell of fresh loaves carried through narrow alleys, drawing hungry Athenians toward the agora long before the market opened. Vendors sold bread from wooden trays or carts, slicing it into chunks for dipping into olive oil or honey. The olives, meanwhile, came from the very soul of Greece. Cultivated for thousands of years, they were more than food. They were a symbol of peace, fertility, and victory. Athenian vendors soaked them in brine, flavored them with herbs, or stuffed them with garlic or figs. For a few coins, a worker could buy a small paper cone filled with olives, their oil staining the wrapper, the ancient equivalent of street fries. Sometimes the two were combined into something simple yet divine. A piece of bread rubbed with garlic, splashed with oil, and topped with crushed olives, eaten with fingers, warm and dripping. To this, some added a slice of goat cheese or a sprinkling of thyme if they could afford the luxury. The poorer citizens of Athens often carried small clay jars of olive oil at their belts, using it for both food and hygiene. When hunger struck, they would tear off a piece of bread, dip it in oil, and chew slowly, letting it soften the dryness of the grain. There was poetry in that simplicity. No sauces, no excess, just what the earth gave. Bread for strength, olives for spirit. Together they formed the poor man's feast, sustaining both body and pride. In a city obsessed with ideas, even the simplest meal carried a touch of philosophy. Nothing wasted, nothing excessive, everything balanced. Among the clamor of the Athenian agora, one sound rose above the rest, the cheerful calls of the honey-ache vendors. Their stalls were surrounded by children clutching coins, soldiers returning from training, and philosophers sneaking in a guilty pleasure before resuming their debates. The sweet scent of warm honey drifting through the air was impossible to resist. Honey was the dessert of the gods, and the Greeks treated it as such. It sweetened their sacrifices, perfumed their wine, and turned even the most basic grain into a delight. The most famous of all street sweets was the melitutua, small round cakes made from flour and cheese, deep fried in olive oil, then drenched in thick golden honey. Vendors displayed them on bronze trays, their surfaces glistening in the sunlight like coins from Olympus. These cakes were a luxury that even the poor could occasionally afford. A small honey cake cost just a few ols, and the taste was said to bring comfort on the hardest days. In the heat of the market, people would tear them apart with their fingers, letting the syrup stick to their skin before licking it away. For a few moments, even a slave could taste something divine. The vendors themselves were characters as vibrant as their goods. They wore aprons stained with flour and honey, shouting their offers like poets performing verses. Hot cakes, sweet as Aphrodite's kiss, one bite and you'll forget your debts. Their humor and showmanship were part of the sale. The best sellers weren't just cooks, they were performers of pleasure. Honey itself was sacred. It was said to be a gift from the nymphs, and the bees were thought to be servants of the gods. To eat honey was to taste immortality, and in every sticky bite of street pastry, Athenians felt a touch of the divine world they worshipped. Sometimes before festivals or plays, crowds lined up for honey cakes, their laughter and chatter mixing with the hum of flutes and the smell of roasted nuts. It was a communal indulgence, a moment of sweetness in a city built on struggle, trade, and talk. In ancient Athens, even pleasure was portable, served hot, golden, and wrapped in the hum of the streets. Not every Athenian could afford honey cakes or grilled fish. For the majority, workers, sailors, and slaves, chickpeas and lentils were the taste of daily life. Humble, nourishing, and cheap, they were sold on every corner by men with small bronze pots balanced over coals, the aroma drifting through the marketplace like a promise of warmth. Roasted chickpeas were the original Greek snack, crunchy, salty, and addictively simple. Vendors scooped them straight from pans with wooden ladles into small clay bowls or even folded leaves, shouting, "Hot chickpeas for the strong and the wise." Children clutched them by the handful, chewing as they followed their parents through the agora. For soldiers and travelers, these little legumes were the perfect food. They lasted for weeks, filled the stomach, and cost next to nothing. At the other end of the market, a different scent filled the air, that of lentil stew, simmering slowly in clay pots. It was called fake, and it was the most democratic dish in Greece. From beggars to philosophers, everyone ate it. Socrates himself was said to have favored lentil soup, calling it the meal of the contented man. Thickened with olive oil, onion, and vinegar, it was both simple and sustaining, the kind of food that reminded Athenians that even the humblest meal could be noble when shared. To poor citizens, lentil stew wasn't just food, it was comfort. Vendors ladled it, steaming into small bowls for customers to eat on the spot. Workers ate it, sitting on stone steps, dipping stale bread into the thick broth, and wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands. The stew's earthy aroma mingled with the sounds of the marketplace, the ringing of coins, the cry of merchants, the bleating of goats. Occasionally, wealthier Athenians added garlic, herbs, or even bits of sausage to elevate the dish. But for most, the pure flavor of lentils was enough. It tasted of survival, of home, of life continuing despite hardship. In the bustling agora chickpeas popped in pans, lentils bubbled over coals, and the scent of oil and earth filled the air. This was the food of the people, simple, enduring, and unmistakably Greek. A quiet counterpoint to the city's noise and glory. By midday, the agora filled with the smell of the sea. The fishermen had arrived. Rough men with salt in their hair and voices like gravel, pushing carts heavy with the morning's catch. Their arrival transformed the marketplace into a seaside feast. The sizzling of grilled fish joined the chorus of merchants, philosophers, and gossip. Fish was Athens' favorite luxury and its most common comfort food. The poor bought sardines, anchovies, or sprats, small bony fish that were grilled whole on skewers. The wealthy might choose red mullet or sea bream, their flesh tender and glistening with oil. But whether you were a beggar or a general, the ritual was the same. Grill, salt, drizzle with lemon, and eat while still steaming. Vendors worked quickly. They lit small fires beneath clay grates, brushing fish with olive oil and herbs. Smoke rose in soft white ribbons, carrying the scent through the agora. Passers-by couldn't resist. Even philosophers paused mid-debate, drawn toward the promise of charred skin and salt. The vendors sprinkled the fish with oregano, thyme, or crushed coriander, their movements swift and practiced. Some customers ate standing, tearing the fish apart with their fingers, while others wrapped their portions in grape leaves to carry along the dusty streets. The bones were discarded into the gutters where cats and stray dogs feasted in their own way. The agora was noisy, smoky, alive, and always hungry. Beyond Athens, in port towns like Piraeus, fish stalls were even more vibrant. There, sailors drank watered wine and ate skewers of grilled squid or octopus, their laughter echoing across the docks. For them, seafood wasn't just nourishment. It was a connection to Poseidon himself, a divine gift from the sea that sustained both commerce and appetite. Even the smell became part of daily life. Fish, smoke clung to tunics, hair, and hands. The scent of Athens itself as familiar as olive oil or dust. And though many mocked the city's obsession with seafood, none could deny that it was the heartbeat of its streets. In every grilled sardine and slice of red mullet, Athens tasted both its labor and its leisure. Proof that even the simplest flame could turn the days. Catch into something divine. No Athenian meal, whether rich or poor, was complete without drink. But contrary to modern imagination, no one in Greece drank wine straight. That would have been considered barbaric. Instead, wine was mixed with water, sometimes flavored with herbs or honey, creating a light, refreshing drink that could be enjoyed even in the blazing afternoon sun. Street taverns, or kappa, were the lifeblood of Athens after midday. They weren't grand dining halls, but small open-air stalls, usually shaded by linen awnings. A few wooden benches, some clay cups, and a jug of wine were all that was needed to turn a corner of the agora into a gathering place. Vendors poured krassi, diluted wine, from amphora into small clay cups, while the air buzzed with laughter, debate, and the scrape of sandals on stone. These taverns were not places of refinement, but of conversation. Merchants argued about trade. Sailors boasted about storms survived. Philosophers naturally debated about moderation while rarely practicing it. The drink itself was a mix of art and practicality. Too strong and it clouded the mind. Too weak and it dulled the spirit. The Greeks prized balance even in their cups. Alongside the wine came snacks, salty olives, roasted nuts, and small pieces of fried dough dusted with herbs. These simple bites were designed to keep one's wits sharp while prolonging the drinking. Some taverns offered wine sweetened with honey to those who could afford a sweeter indulgence. Others poured wine spiced with cinnamon or anise, giving the marketplace a faint perfumed warmth. There was also a clear social rhythm to drinking. In the early hours, men drank quickly before returning to work. By evening, the taverns became livelier, filled with song, dice games, and the distant hum of flutes. Drunkenness was frowned upon in Athens, but merriment was encouraged. To drink was not to escape life, but to celebrate its order, to toast the gods, the harvest, or simply surviving another day. As dusk fell and the last aeri were emptied, the taverns dimmed, the city quieted. Yet the scent of wine and honey lingered in the air, the perfume of a people who found philosophy even in their thirst. If you followed your nose through the Athenian agora, past the fish, smoke, and honeyed pastries, you'd eventually find the spice sellers, the quiet magicians of the street. Their stalls were smaller than most, yet their presence was unmistakable. The air around them shimmered with the perfume of pepper, coriander, cumin, and saffron. Long before the word exotic existed, Athens smelled like the world. Spices were the crossroads of trade and taste. Ships from Egypt, Phoenicia, and Persia brought strange powders and dried herbs in clay jars sealed with wax. These treasures weren't just for the wealthy. Even the humblest street vendor sprinkled cumin or oregano onto bread, lentils, or grilled meat to give it character. For an extra coin, you could buy your meal seasoned like a lord's, as one spice seller would boast. Their stalls were displays of color and mystery. Mounds of crimson saffron, pale yellow mustard, and deep green thyme filled the counters. Some vendors burned bay leaves or myrrh in small censers to attract customers, letting the fragrant smoke curl above their heads. The smell of roasting chickpeas mingled with spice smoke, creating a sensory fog that hung over the marketplace like incense in a temple. Spices were not just about flavor, they carried meaning. Cumin was thought to symbolize greed, while coriander was a sign of vitality. Saffron was luxury itself, used in perfumes, robes, and desserts. To eat something spiced with saffron was to taste wealth, if only for a moment. Even garlic and onion, the humblest of ingredients, were prized for their boldness, a sign of strength. Much like the Spartans, who devoured them before battle. For many Athenians, spices transformed daily food into an experience. A bowl of lentils could become aromatic and rich, a piece of fried fish divine. The best vendors developed reputations that rivaled philosophers, one known for his Egyptian cinnamon, another for his secret blend of herbs good for love and courage. The agora's symphony of smells was as vital as it sounds. The crackle of oil, the hiss of smoke, the laughter of crowds, all threaded together by scent. In every grain of spice lay a whisper of faraway lands, proof that even in ancient times, Athens tasted the world one breath at a time. On festival days, the streets of Athens became a living feast. The agora, already lively on ordinary mornings, exploded into a carnival of food, music, and celebration. Vendors from every corner of Attica flooded the city, their carts piled high with ingredients meant to please both mortals and gods. Smoke curled above the rooftops, mingling with the sound of flutes and laughter as Athenians forgot their troubles and surrendered to appetite. During the Panathenaic festival, which honored Athena herself, even the poorest citizens could indulge. Farmers offered their best olives. Fishermen grilled eels from lake Copys, and bakers competed to produce the fluffiest honey bread. The air shimmered with heat and the smell of sesame oil. Priests performed sacrifices at dawn, and by midday the streets became dining halls without walls. Tables groaned with roasted goat, barley, porridge, cheese, figs, and freshly baked flatbread. Everyone, citizens, medics, and slaves, shared in the bounty. Street food took on a special role during these celebrations. Vendors sold skewers of grilled meat, called obeliskoi, dripping with juices and sprinkled with herbs. Children darted through the crowd, clutching sesame pastries and candied nuts. Potters shaped small clay cups on the spot, filling them with watered wine for those who came without a vessel. Even the philosophers took a break from rhetoric to enjoy a sweet or two. Music, dance, and food formed a single rhythm. Drummers pounded, dancers spun, and the smell of roasted lamb blended with the perfume of flowers strewn across the streets. Some vendors shouted their praises to the gods while flipping fish over open flames. Others whispered prayers as they poured honey over hot cakes. To eat was to worship, to honor the divine through pleasure. As the sun sank behind the Acropolis, the festival's fires burned low, and the last vendors sold off what they could. Leftover bread and olives were given to beggars. The rest was carried home in woven baskets. By nightfall, Athens was quiet again, its marble streets sticky with honey, its citizens full and content. In those fleeting hours, food became unity, a reminder that even in a city ruled by intellect and debate, joy still began with something as simple as a bite shared among neighbors. Though centuries have passed, the spirit of ancient Greek street food never truly disappeared. It simply evolved. The same smells that once drifted through the agora still linger in the air of modern Mediterranean markets. Honey warming over coals, oregano crushed under the hand, olive oil shimmering like liquid sunlight. The Athenians may be gone, but their philosophy of food, simple, communal, and deeply human, lives on. Street food in ancient Greece was never just about hunger, it was about connection. To eat from a vendor's hand was to take part in the rhythm of the city, to taste its soil, its trade routes, and its stories. The hum of the market was an orchestra, and food was its melody. Fishermen, bakers, and farmers were not just merchants. They were the city's unseen poets, crafting small, edible verses of daily life. The olive, the chickpea, and the honey cake carried the values of an entire civilization. Moderation, harmony, and respect for the natural world. Every meal, no matter how humble, reflected the Greek belief in balance, the idea that beauty and simplicity could coexist. It was food that demanded mindfulness, eaten slowly, savored, discussed, even philosophized over. When the Romans later borrowed from Greek culture, they adopted much of this street food tradition. The markets of Rome were filled with echoes of Athens. Grilled fish, bread dipped in oil, sweet pastries soaked in honey. Even the word thermopolium, meaning hot food shop, carried the DNA of the Greek agora. Through trade and conquest, the Athenian idea of accessible, flavorful food spread across the ancient world, laying the foundation for the world's first fast food culture, one that prized not speed, but shared experience. Today, when someone bites into warm pita filled with herbs or drizzles honey over fried dough, they unknowingly repeat a ritual thousands of years old. The flavors of sesame, olive, and lemon still whisper of marble streets and sunlit markets. The legacy of ancient Greek street food is not found in recipes, but in the philosophy it left behind. That food is democracy made visible, a celebration of simplicity, equality, and pleasure. In every bite, the agora still breathes, eternal, fragrant, and alive. The Silk Road was not one road, but 1,000 threads of dust and stone that stitched together the ancient world. From Chang'an in China to Antioch on the Mediterranean, it wound across mountains, deserts, and kingdoms like a living artery of trade and faith. It carried silk, yes, shimmering bolts that symbolized wealth and mystery, but it also carried stories, ideas, and the scent of faraway lands. To walk the Silk Road was to walk through the veins of civilization itself. At dawn, the caravan stirred. Bells tinkled on camel necks, and the desert wind carried the low groan of animals rising under heavy loads. Men wrapped their faces in cloth, shielding themselves from the dust. The leader of the caravan Bashi, shouted orders in a mix of tongues: Persian, Sogdian, Turkic, Arabic, Chinese. Around him moved traders, monks, and guards, each with a different destination, yet bound by the same purpose: to cross the void and survive. The desert was cruel and vast. The Taklamakan, whose name meant you go in and never come out, stretched like an ocean of gold under a pittal sun. The heat by day could boil the air, and at night frost would glitter on the sand. But the merchants endured it all, driven by the promise of fortune. A single bolt of Chinese silk could buy a Roman soldier's armor. A pouch of saffron was worth more than its weight in silver. Along the road stood caravanerais, roadside inns that offered refuge from the endless sand. Here merchants could eat, wash, and share tales by the fire. One might meet a Greek scholar discussing astronomy with a Persian sage, while a Buddhist monk offered blessings to passing guards. Deals were made, stories traded, and rumors spread faster than the wind. The Silk Road was not merely commerce, it was communion. Each caravan was a moving world: camels laden with spices and glassware, horses bearing scrolls and jade, and men carrying dreams. As they moved, they wove invisible threads across continents, connecting cities, gods, and destinies. Long before ships or telegraphs, the Silk Road made the world one, not through conquest, but through exchange. If the Silk Road was a living artery, the merchants were its lifeblood. Multilingual, shrewd, and endlessly adaptable, they came from every corner of the known world. Sogdians from Samarkand, Arabs from Damascus, Persians from Nishapur, and Han Chinese from the east. Each spoke in a blend of dialects, gestures, and smiles, bartering not only with goods, but with trust. On this road, survival depended less on steel and more on the art of understanding. A good merchant could recognize the weight of gold by touch, the quality of silk by sound. They were mathematicians without ledgers, linguists without schools. In the bazaars of Bara or Kashgar, they'd sit cross-legged in shaded courtyards, counting coins from dozens of kingdoms while sipping green tea or fermented Mars milk. Around them, languages mixed like spices in a pot: Greek, Sanskrit, Mongolian, Persian, the true music of the Silk Road. The Styans, in particular, were masters of the route. They didn't merely sell, they connected worlds. Fluent in the tongues of East and West, they acted as translators, guides, and diplomats. A Styon trader might leave Samek with bolts of silk and return months later with Roman glass, Indian pepper, and tales of strange temples and gods. They were bridge builders, turning deserts into marketplaces and mountains into corridors of exchange. Trust was the currency that mattered most. There were no banks, no border patrols, no credit systems, only reputation. A broken promise could ruin a man faster than bandits ever could. To protect their deals, merchants relied on family networks that spanned thousands of miles. Letters written in elegant scripts traveled from oasis to oasis, sealed with wax and faith. At night, when the campfires burned low, the merchants spoke not of profit, but of stories, of sea monsters near India, of snow demons in the premiere, of golden cities waiting beyond the dunes. Some were lies, others half-truths, but all kept the imagination alive across endless miles. These men weren't just traders. They were the earliest global citizens, fluent in difference, comfortable in motion, and united by a shared hunger for discovery. The Silk Road didn't just sell goods, it sold possibility. Every journey on the Silk Road began and ended with one indispensable companion, the camel. Patient, stubborn, and uncomplaining, these beasts were the ships of the desert, carrying the weight of empires across endless dunes. Without them, the Silk Road would have been little more than a dream buried beneath the sands. Two breeds ruled the route. The Bactrian camel, with its two shaggy humps, thrived in the cold winds of Central Asia, while the dromedary, with one sleek hump, endured the heat of the southern deserts. Both could walk for days without water, carrying up to 500 pounds of silk, porcelain, or spices. Their long eyelashes and closing nostrils made them nearly invincible against the storming sands of the Tlamacan and the Gobi. Caravans often numbered hundreds of camels, each tied nose to tail in an unbroken line that stretched like a serpent across the horizon. The caravan bashi or leader rode at the front, setting the pace. Behind him came the guards, then the traders, and finally the cooks and laborers. Each animal had its place, a hierarchy of hooves. Even the sound of their steps created a rhythm, a heartbeat of trade that pulsed across Asia. The camels were treated with reverence. Before setting out, handlers decorated them with bells, tassels, and colorful cloths, not for vanity, but to ward off evil spirits said to dwell in the desert. In many cultures, the camel was sacred. In Persia, it symbolized endurance. In China, it appeared in tomb carvings as a sign of wealth and adventure. Yet, the relationship was not without hardship. The desert was merciless. Blinding sandstorms could scatter caravans. Freezing nights could kill both men and beasts. When that happened, travelers built small stone mounds beside the bones, silent graves for the loyal dead. At rest stops, the caravanserais echoed with their groans as they knelt to be unloaded. The smell of sweat, hay, and spice filled the air. Men sang to calm them, knowing that panic could destroy the entire expedition. For centuries, these creatures carried the treasures of the world: silk from China, glass from Rome, incense from Arabia. They never knew what they bore or why, yet their slow, steady steps connected continents. In their shadows, the Silk Road moved forward, one hoofprint at a time. Scattered across the vast emptiness of Asia stood the caravans, fortified inns that offered weary travelers a brief refuge from the brutality of the road. To those crossing the desert these way stations were more than shelter. They were lifelines. Built every 20 to 30 miles, each marked the distance a camel could travel before exhaustion. Between their walls, the Silk Road paused to breathe. From the outside, a caravanserai looked like a small fortress, thick mud brick walls, heavy wooden gates, and narrow windows to repel thieves. But inside, life flourished. Merchants, monks, guards, and animals all shared the same courtyard. The sound of clinking harnesses, boiling tea, and laughter filled the night air. The scent of spices, sweat, and roasting meat mingled beneath the stars. Upon arrival, the gates closed with a heavy thud, sealing travelers safely within. The courtyard bustled with motion. Camels knelt as their loads were removed. Servants fetched water from wells, and traders stretched their cramped legs. Around the edges of the courtyard were small rooms for sleeping and storing goods, while an elevated platform at the center often served as both dining area and trading floor. By evening, the fires were lit over, shared bowls of rice, lentils, and dried fruits. Stories traveled faster than the goods themselves. A Persian carpet dealer might dine beside a Chinese monk, while a Turk guard listened to a Roman merchant describe the faraway sea. Languages collided, ideas intertwined, and rumors took wing. Some caravans arise, even doubled as post stations, where messengers delivered letters between empires, the first sparks of global communication. Hospitality was sacred along the Silk Road. It was said that a guest who entered a caravanserai was protected by God for 3 nights. No one asked questions of creed or kingdom. Survival erased such divisions. Even enemies shared a meal under those roofs. At dawn, as the gates creaked open, the caravans departed one by one, vanishing back into the desert. Behind them, the innkeepers swept the courtyards, awaiting the next weary souls. These stone refugees became the heartbeat of the Silk Road, islands of safety in an ocean of sand. Within their walls, empires met as equals, bound not by war or crown, but by the shared need for warmth, food, and a place to dream before the next horizon. For every fortune made on the Silk Road, there were countless that never reached their destination. Behind the romance of spice-laden caravans and golden fabrics lay a journey ruled by danger, bandits, deserts, disease, and despair. The path from Samarkand to Kashgar was as perilous as it was profitable. Bandits haunted the mountain passes and desert edges. Traveling caravans hired armed guards or even mercenaries, men hardened by the road and quick with a blade. Some bandit gangs were desperate villagers. Others were organized raiders who demanded taxes in exchange for safe passage. To be caught unprepared was to vanish. Goods stolen, travelers slain, and camels sold in the next town as if nothing had happened. But nature, too, was an enemy. The Teklamikan Desert, the Sea of Death, stretched for hundreds of miles with no mercy. Travelers marked the way with bones or cannons of stones, but shifting sands buried all traces. Sandstorms could rise without warning, darkening the sky and suffocating both man and beast. Those who strayed even a little from the path were swallowed whole. Water was life. Caravans planned their journeys around oases, those fragile dots of green that kept the Silk Road alive. The names of these places, Mv, Turpin, Dunang, became legends whispered by travelers like prayers. Reaching one meant survival. Missing one meant doom. Many who failed to find them became ghost stories told around fires at night. Illness followed the travelers like a shadow. New climates brought new diseases. A fever caught in Persia might be carried to China. Yet in this exchange of sickness came another gift, the spread of medicine. Greek doctors traded herbs with Indian healers. Chinese physicians taught pulse diagnosis to Arabs. Knowledge like silk was a cargo of great value. Even exhaustion could kill. Nights in the high palm froze skin in minutes. Days in the desert cracked it like leather. The strong learned to walk without complaint to conserve breath and thought. And yet, despite every peril, the caravans kept moving. The road devoured lives, but birthed legends. For those who crossed it, the Silk Road was not merely geography. It was a trial of faith, courage, and endurance. A test written in sand and stone. Amid the emptiness of the Silk Road, there were cities that shone like mirages, islands of life in a sea of dust. Samarkand, Mv, Brahara, Kashgar, and Dunhuang. Their very names carried the weight of wonder. To reach one after weeks in the desert was to step out of silence into music, out of death into color. These oases were not only lifelines for travelers. They were the beating hearts of civilization itself. Each city was a crossroads of worlds. Samarkand, the glittering gem of Sagdana, was a city of domes and markets where Persian poets, Chinese scholars, and Arab traders bargained beneath the same blue tiles. Perfume sellers offered rose oil beside spice merchants from India. You could hear 10 languages in a single street, none needing translation once the haggling began. Bukhara was known for its libraries and schools. Caravans paused there not only to trade goods, but to trade knowledge. Buddhist monks shared space with Victorian Christians, while Zoroastrian priests debated philosophy and shaded courtyards. The smell of ink mixed with the scent of cumin and smoke. Knowledge itself became a form of commerce. Further east lay Kashgar, nestled where the Tinchin Mountains met the desert. Its bazaars overflowed with silk, porcelain, turquoise, and horses. Caravan bells echoed through narrow lanes as traders replenished supplies before facing the treacherous passes ahead. In the evenings, musicians played the dutar and sang of distant lands, songs that seemed to carry the wind of the whole Silk Road within them. Dunhuang, perched at the edge of the Gobi, was more than an oasis. It was a sanctuary. Its famous Mogo caves, carved into cliffs of stone, were filled with painted Buddhas, celestial dancers, and travelers' prayers. Merchants left offerings there before venturing into the desert, hoping for safe passage. In these cities, ideas traveled faster than silk. Greek astronomy met Indian medicine. Persian art mingled with Chinese brushwork. Every exchange, a coin, a spice, a word, left an imprint. To rest in an oasis city was to glimpse what the Silk Road truly was, a bridge between worlds, a place where dust and divinity met, where every street corner whispered that the world was far larger and far more connected than anyone had imagined. The Silk Road carried not just silk and spices, it carried souls. Along its winding paths, faiths met, mingled, and transformed. From Buddhist monks in saffron robes to Nestrian priests clutching crosses, from Zoroastrian fire worshippers to wandering Sufi mystics, the road became a moving temple where belief itself was a form of trade. The Buddhists were among the earliest travelers of faith. From India, they journeyed northward through the passes of the Himalayas and into the oases of Central Asia. Monks established monasteries in MV, Bork and Dunhuang, carving shrines into cliffs and painting stories of the Buddha on the walls. These sanctuaries served not only as places of worship, but as rest stops for weary travelers. Merchants, regardless of their religion, were welcome to share food, shelter, and safety, the true currency of compassion. Farther west, Zoroastrians tended eternal flames in Persia, teaching of light and darkness, good and evil, ideas that would later influence Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Their temples glowed like beacons for passing caravans, offering a reminder that even in the desert, the fire of faith never died. With time came the Christians, particularly the Nestorians, who carried their version of the gospel eastward. They built churches in Samarkand and Kashgar, where crosses stood beside Buddhist stupas and Zoroastrian altars. These communities thrived in diversity, a rare experiment in coexistence. The road taught tolerance, not by decree, but by necessity. A merchant couldn't afford to despise a man whose help he might need at the next oasis. Then came the Muslims, their caravans spreading not only goods, but the rhythm of prayer. The call to prayer echoed across caravans arise from Baghdad to Bara. Islam, with its emphasis on charity, hospitality, and trade, found fertile ground among merchants who already lived by those virtues. And yet, for all their differences, these faiths shared the same wind, the same dust, the same hope of safety on the endless road. Pilgrims and traders prayed side by side under the same stars, trusting that their gods, however named, watched over them equally. The Silk Road was not merely a route of commerce. It was a pilgrimage of humanity, where belief became both a burden and a bridge, linking hearts across continents. Every caravan that creaked along the Silk Road carried more than goods. It carried dreams, the essence of what one world desired from another. Each bundle, jar, or bolt of fabric told a story of distance and longing. In the dry air of the desert, smells and colors became currency. The clinking of coins was only half the music of trade. The other half was the rustle of silk and the whisper of spice. Silk was the treasure that named the road. Light as breath and stronger than any cloth, it dazzled those who saw it for the first time. In Rome, it was said that senators gasped when they held Chinese silk to the light, watching it shimmer like water. To own it was to wear the East itself. Entire empires rose and fell, trying to control its flow. Yet no army could stop the caravans. Silk traveled farther and faster than kings ever could. Then there were the spices. Saffron from Persia, cinnamon from India, cloves from Indonesia. These tiny fragments of the earth were worth more than gold. In the cold markets of the West, they brought warmth and memory, the taste of sunlight, the scent of summer. A handful of peppercorns could buy a slave, a pouch of saffron, a horse. To carry such things across deserts was to carry temptation itself. But not all treasures glittered or burned. Some were fragile, ideas and stories traded in words rather than weight. Travelers swapped tales of sea monsters near India, Fireb breathing mountains beyond China, and phoenixes rising from Arabian sands. From these exaggerations grew legends, myths that traveled faster than the caravans themselves. Paper and ink joined the trade too. Buddhist sutras were copied in one land and translated in another. Persian poets found their verses carved in Chinese calligraphy. Scholars at caravans shared maps, medicines, and philosophies. Each discovery a new strand in the growing web of human knowledge. By the time a caravan reached its journey's end, its wares had already changed hands, languages, and meanings. What began as silk in China might end as scripture in Byzantium. What left the East as spice might return as perfume. On the Silk Road, everything, even truth, was traded, shaped, and reborn long after the last camel bell faded into silence. The Silk Road remained not as a trail of sand, but as an idea. It had done what no empire could. It connected humanity across 3 continents. It bound strangers into neighbors, merchants into messengers, and faiths into conversation. Though the caravans vanished, their echoes lived on in language, art, and the mingled bloodlines of those who once walked beneath its burning sun. The road changed the world quietly. It was not built by kings, but by ordinary people, traders, monks, weavers, and wanderers. They didn't conquer with armies. They conquered with curiosity. From them came the exchange of mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and art. Gunpowder traveled westward from China. Glassum and papum traveled east. In its wake, civilizations evolved not in isolation, but in dialogue. Cities that once thrived along the route, Samarkand, Bara, and Kashgar, became living museums, their minarets and mosaics whispering of the golden days when caravans passed through their gates. Even centuries later, the architecture of Europe, the calligraphy of Persia, and the porcelain of China all bore the fingerprints of one another. The Silk Road had made culture itself a shared inheritance. But time is a patient eraser. As maritime trade grew, the great land route began to fade. Ships could carry more than camels, and the ocean, though dangerous, had fewer bandits than the desert. Yet, even as sand reclaimed its paths, the spirit of the Silk Road refused to die. It lived on in new forms, in the exchange of ideas, inventions, and human connection that defines our modern world. Today, historians trace its roots not just in maps, but in our languages and customs. The words we speak, the foods we eat, the fabrics we wear, all carry faint echoes of that ancient highway, a bolt of silk in Italy, a cup of tea in London, a string of prayer beads in Tibet, all descend from the same great river of exchange. The Silk Road proved something profound. That distance is not a barrier, only a bridge waiting to be crossed. It showed that trade could build peace, that curiosity could unite worlds, and that even across deserts of silence, humanity would always find its way back to conversation.